Right, so as I said, this one is going to be sort of inspired a little bit by graffiti art, and what I'm going to do is do a sort of small piece in the middle, and then and then do it into full colour, and then from that you can sort of then build out in sections and see where we're going. So the patterns I'm thinking about are going to be they're going to have a slightly more angular feel to them, maybe not so many curls and more sort of like jaggedy, because it's slightly inspired by, as I was saying, by sort of graffiti art. So I'm starting off with a middle size pen, so something like a 0.4 or 0.5, just because, as I always say, then you can go thicker and you can go lighter. You can start off in a sort of medium zone. I'm probably going to be using, you definitely want to have quite a thick pen handy as well, because we're going to be using some quite dark notes in this as well. So we're going to be using lots of quite punchy shadows as we sort of build up. So the first bit I'm going to do is just like a sort of central pattern. I'm thinking of something quite angular. So angular, just sort of like, I want to start, so let's just start somewhere. So let's just start, I'm going to start, look at that, she says, I'm doing something angular and I start with a circle. Well, I'm going to build it up and do it a bit sort of differently. So I'm just starting with a double sort of ring circle. And what I like about this sort of work is I'm deliberately trying to make it not a perfect circle. I want to have a little bit of edge to it, so it has a sort of slightly jaggedy kind of feel to it as I'm drawing it. And then I'm going to do a sort of teardrop shape coming off that and going into a sort of spiral, maybe something like that, and then bring that sort of leaf teardrop shape back round. And then we can divide this shape up a bit into so I can take this spiral zone through into that, so I've got some nice stripes coming up through that. And we're going to be using the lighter pens, and we may even use a little bit of pencil as well, just to kind of get some different sort of feel to some of these sort of shapes, but we'll go into that a bit more later. And then let's come out from that and draw it round and give it a sort of frame. So I'm just going to do this first bit to start off with and see if we can get some interesting sort of colour effects going in here. And then I think maybe just quite a random shape, something with a bit of a zigzag maybe coming up. So I'm trying to sort of make my lines feel quite sort of robotic in a way, and then where I've got that sort of slightly broken jaggedy line, I'm going to just sort of follow that round, so it's got that sort of shape through there. And then I've got these crest here, so let's sort of echo that again and come up round and fade that down. So I'm getting a shape kind of coming here, and I'm just thinking of sort of like, slightly more can shapes be more urban? I don't know, more urban, more kind of like a bit more geometric, so not so soft, like I say. And I think I'm getting another sort of circle, but I'm letting it go kind of crooked and wonky and not perfect. I want that kind of slightly jagged feel to it, just so we've got something sort of different to play with. And then I think I'm just going to put a nice layer, extra sort of stripe coming down here, again choosing slightly more jagged lines rather than anything too swoopy. And even though I've got that space in there, then I can break that space up, and again maybe with, and if you put a bend in, then try and sort of like echo that in the lines kind of coming round. So obviously I can keep going and I could build the whole page up in shapes first, but I'm going to focus in on this section and kind of have a look at different ways to get the colour and the tone in it. And I want to play with using black lines and white lines and keeping some white lines. So of course I'm not going to draw white lines. What I'm going to do is kind of isolate the white lines. So, and that's in some of the ways that we've been doing, sort of like immediately echoing the shape that we've drawn. So to get a white line to appear, like where I've got this curve coming through here, I'm going to then do another line coming along that's following that, and that space in between, that's going to stay quite white when I draw this. And then so I can do a similar thing, so maybe that line there where it's double, I'm going to leave that being as a white line. So let's do another one kind of coming round here, so that edge there, and I'm going to think about that just being a white edge. And to make that a bit more obvious, I'm going to put some black alongside it in a minute. But then this circular sort of shape that I've got going on here, again, I'm going to sort of come around, and I don't mind if my line isn't following it 100% perfectly. I just want to leave, because remember, we can't make a highlight on here that's brighter than the paper. So our white paper is like our super powered highlight. So we're going to protect that area on some of these, on these edges. So that's going to give that feeling that the edges are sort of more three-dimensional, because we always have that thing, if I'm now doing an edge along here, anything that's really bright and white, again, it tends to look higher up and closer to the camera, and the sort of darker colours always sort of push back and look like they're receding, like they're going backwards. So I'm just going to double up this line here, and then we've got this spiral shape in here, so let's take that into quite a nice wide shape and then come back round. So that's just given that, so all that in there is going to stay white, and we're going to put colour in between these sort of areas just to give it kind of different feel. Then we've got our sort of zigzag section up here, so I'm going to imagine almost like I'm taking a wall, you know, like the Great Wall of China or sort of castle battlements, and just sort of come round and leaving that walkway in white, just sort of moving round. That's it. And you can, when you're doing the zigzag lines, you can take your pen off once you get to a corner just to make that really sharp, and then bring it round and join it up like that, and that gives us this sort of, just this sort of double edge. Then I've got another one here to do with this line here. Look, I've just got a little wall here. I've gone all the way across there. I'm quite happy with that, so I'm just going to join it up again. So it doesn't matter if you get little like breaks coming in, because it's just going to add to the texture and the feel of what we're trying to do. And then again, this one, bringing it, following the zigzag round, just thinking all the time about this sort of white. There's going to be like a sort of like a white lightning strike almost, and it's going to add an extra sort of gleam. But again, because we're doing something a bit more kind of, eventually it's going to look quite vibrant, it's going to look quite strong and quite sort of dramatic. So it's okay to have these sort of more jagged lines to it. And then we've got sort of a line here. I've got one sort of coming through here, and then it kind of gets sucked up into that one there. So you could choose to do the inside of this triangle, but just to be different, I'm going to do the outside of that triangle just to see how that works, how that gives me something different to play with, just so we've got something else happening in there. And with these circular shapes, I'm going to leave them, but I think I might put something in the middle, almost like a little star, just to be like, again, quite a white highlight. Now we can always go back and eventually soften away the white highlights, or just leave the tiniest amount of them. But we're going to make a definite sort of area of highlight first, so we know where we are. And then we might, you know, you can then sort of think, right, well, I might add in, like I could bring another curve in around this side. And if you were drawing, now you kind of see where you're going, you could kind of draw your whites, so all the time you're drawing a double line in, you know, you could work that way around as well. I've got this section here. We're going to leave the stripes in the middle, they're going to stay dark, and I'm going to bring, I think, just this outside edge coming round. And again, you see, you can make it slightly different. It hasn't got to be perfectly even, you know, it can stay quite jagged in feel. And I bring that down into a sort of like a wasp tail coming there, because it's going to have this much more sort of strong, jagged kind of edge. Now, once we've done this, I'm going to put an initial bit of extra black in around these lines to give them some shadow. I'm going to soften that eventually. I'm going to use more shading to kind of blend it in a little bit so it's not so stark in some places. But I'm going to swap to, now you might want to swap to a 0.8, and then you might want to go for, if you've got a nice controllable black brush pen, that might work as well. So I just want to add now an extra line of strong black alongside my white line. So this is going to add, and it starts to add a bit of shadow, because it's this strong, thick, dark line. It's sort of beefing them up and giving them a bit more shadow. And again, where they come together in the corners, you're going to be having two thick dark lines meeting into a sharp corner, and that starts to add more kind of shadow and a bit more drama. So we can go along the outside, and that's already starting to make those white lines look more stronger and bolder. And where they meet up together, you can decide to just thicken like that sort of point together, so they start to have so they're not, the black lines aren't 100% even. As they come towards the corner, they thicken as if you're sort of dropping into a shadow, so you're putting more shadow in. So I'm just almost doing like a little wedge or triangle into that corner, and I'm slightly eating away into that white shape, and it's just softening the edge of like that shape there. So in this next shape along here, I can use my black pen in there just up into that side, and then maybe on this edge I'm going to put a slightly wider black line, because it starts to give a slightly different sort of feel, as if one side you're seeing it from a slight angle. And then this edge here, this is going to continue round. Where I've got this white line here, you can see I've got this circle, you've got these white lines meeting. I want to continue that black line over the top so that that join starts to really sort of fall into a bit of shadow again. So all this outline around this circle, I'm going to take it all the way round, and it's fine to cross over the white kind of battlements, hilltops, I'm thinking, you know, the sort of white space, because it's sort of as if this is now casting a shadow down on it. It's just going to give it extra kind of presence. And then onto this section here again, yeah, underneath this line I might just keep this as a single extra line, and then I can come back round here, and this one I'm going to make it chunkier, so again a little bit extra on that side, just as if you're just seeing slightly more of that edge because of the angle that you're looking down on it. So let's just double that line up. This round here I'm going to fatten that a bit more as well, so it's starting to get a lot more drama in there. And into that corner there, again a bit of extra, so I'm getting lots of nice shadow into there. Okay, so then I've got a little line here, so let's put shadow around that one. There we go. And let's go into this top line here. Now I'm going to do this in the 0.8, and then I'm going to get my brush pen, because I'm going to show you how you can do it with a brush pen. You'll have to judge with the brush pen, because some of them have softer nibs than others. So some of them, you know, you have to be very sensitive with. Some of them you can actually, they just give you a wider sweep of a line without being too sensitive. My one is one of these refillable Pentel. I do not get money from Pentel for saying this, but I do like it. It's a refillable one. But the nylon brush head on it is quite soft, so I can be, it's very responsive, so I can have to be a little bit, I can get quite a different thick and thin kind of effect quite quickly with this, just by putting extra pressure on it. So like on these sort of lines here, I can come up one side and give it quite a nice dark sweep just by sort of pushing down on my pen, and then I can go over the crest and just put less pressure, and I get a thinner line quite sort of easily. So these are really useful for putting, if you want to get some black into your composition, you want to get quite dramatic shadow, because they're a bit faster than using your 0.8 or something. But they are of course slightly harder to control, so you might find it easier to go in with the 0.8 and sort of just take some time to begin with. 0.8 should be fine. If you're feeling really mad, you could do it with like a really thin one and just spend ages and carefully craft each bank of shadow. That's completely up to you. I don't think I would quite have the patience for that. So on this one I've got an overlap going this way, so let's go with it and just take these round. But I do quite like using a brush pen for the variety they get. I find that the ones you buy, if you get a pack of fine liners, they may have a brush pen with them. Those ones, I find the brush nib is firmer, which has its advantages. It's not a bad thing, it's just a different kind of pen. So if you've not used it before and you've got one looking at you in your pen pack and you think, oh, maybe I'll give it a go, I'd recommend having a go on a spare bit of paper just to get the feel of how it's going, because they all have, and of course they soften slightly over time. Right, I'm onto this section now, so I'm going to put a nice sweep along here. They soften over time, so you might find that they start one way and they get a bit softer as you use them, and they spread out a bit more. If you try and just think about where the actual tip is touching you the whole time, and the rest of it will kind of take care of itself. So if you just think about where the tip is, and you'll sort of soon get a sense of the depth of the nib on this one and how you feel about it. That's it. So I'm going to bring this round this curl here. There we are. Just take it round in there and come inside as well. And if they meet up and you get extra shadow, that's fine, because we're going for quite a dramatic kind of feel through here. So there we go. So that's the starting to see you getting a much stronger line, and we're leaving that white now, and the white is quite sort of much more obvious in these sort of areas. So on this stripy kind of piece here, let's go round the edge first. Now I'm trying to also get an effect in this. We're going to get an effect to try and eventually make this look like it's got quite a metallic, shiny surface. I'm ignoring these stripes at the moment. I'm just going all the way along this white outline first. So we've got to be aware of where we want our white highlights to come, because the thing about anything that is sort of slick or reflective or has a metallic quality to it is that it's going to have quite strong differentiated, it's going to have quite strong white highlights on it. So we're going to be aware of that when we do this sort of section. You'll see what I mean as we get a bit more into using the colours and some of the finer pens. We want it to, eventually it's going to have hopefully a really sort of jewel-like kind of quality, really shiny to please all our inner magpies. I think we've all got a bit of an inner magpie. We all like a bit of bling and, a bit of shine. And I'm going to come across here just to sort of bring that line around. And then on this one, remember we've just overlapped here, so I'm going to take that line all the way across into the zigzags. And the brush pen kind of does quite a nice job of giving that slightly different weight, because each time you approach the zigzag, you're coming from a sort of different angle and you get a different pressure on the pen. Take this line down into here and then this corner up and across this top zigzag. And we'll be back to this pen because some of this is going to need some really intense shadow in it. And I think we've seen before that, compositions can work really well with strong shadow. It can make them add lots of drama, particularly when using colour. So along here, maybe not too thick a line, slightly, just on the very tip of the brush pen. Now you could, if you wanted to, draw all this in brush pen, leaving your white lines in one go. But for me, I think I find that a little bit daunting. I think I'd rather sort of have a line to follow and thicken it up when I want to do that, rather than going straight in with a brush pen. In this sort of circular area here, I still want to come round here, but I'm hoping that as I come round and we get to the thin bit, as it were, at the top, then we should hopefully get all the dark lines merging together. And so that should get really very shadowed and sort of disappear off into the darkness. We're going to probably increase that effect and make it even stronger. So let's just bring that up around there. And then I'm going to go round this inner circle as well. And you can see as we go into the narrow section, that's going to join up and become completely sort of dark. And it gives it slightly more of a crescent feel. And if it doesn't do it, you can always add a bit of extra pen in so that it does. And it's quite good for, you can kind of edit your shape and go and sort of have a sort of slight play with it, and sort of if you think it's not quite where you want it to be. And same with around the star, I'm going to just go around the outside of the star. So you can be very delicate with a brush pen. You can often get calligraphy felt tip pens that have sort of like, or fibre tip pens rather, that have like a sort of chisel almost shaped end, and they're quite fun to play with, but they're quite solid, so they don't flex in the same way as a brush pen does. But you can certainly get like a really strong, as you go around like this, you'd get a very strong differentiation between going one way and going the other, because you've got a very thick flat nib on them. So I'll come around here, and then again this star, because it's sort of closer to the top edge, it's going to start blending in and casting a very dark pool of shadow. There we go. And then we've got this last section in here, and then we'll get on to the next bit, and we're going to start thinking about where we want those highlights to come, and some other details as well, because we've got plenty more details to add in. Right, so that's just, now obviously again, as I said before, if I was doing a whole piece I might go over the whole page, or I can keep building on that, but we'll stop with the outlining for that point now. Now these stripes here, I want to put them in to be quite dark, but as I said, also just almost like solid black, but we want it to look like quite a metallic surface, or quite a reflective surface. So I'm going to start off by isolating again a sort of area of highlight on here, and being quite sort of bold with it. So inside this stripe here, I'm just going to use this as a guide, and I'm going to draw like a bubble, like this sort of long bubble shape, and that's going to stay white, and that's going to be like my highlight. So I want to imagine that this is the highlight's going to come down these sort of stripes here. As they come down, I want to see, oh, that one's not come out at all. I want to see slightly less of a bubble, so as it comes down it gets smaller until it's just quite a small sort of blob on the end like that, because as the shape gets smaller, obviously there's less surface area for it to reflect on, so it's going to get less. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to colour, use my black brush pen or whatever black pen you've got to come in and just completely colour this stripe in black, but leaving that white bubble of highlight. And then when we come to do the colour, we're going to think about that. So this is going to give us, so we know the top half of this area is got more light to it, so we're also going to colour and use contouring to kind of enhance that feel. But we imagine this is maybe like sort of quite a dark surface, but it's still catching a bit of light, so you can see that sort of hopefully going to start looking a bit like a highlight bubble. And as you come down, we're going to do more techniques like this to kind of give it, to enhance this effect and make everything look quite shiny and quite contrasted. And just do that last one in there. So just leaving that white bubble straight away starts to give that a sort of feeling a bit like a highlight. Right, so in these sort of sections in here, I'm going to do a little bit of fine line work first of all as a kind of guiding point, and then we're going to go in with some colour. So I'm going to swap now to quite a fine pen, so I'm thinking of 0.1 or 0.2 if you've got it, but probably this the thinnest. You can even go 0.05, sorry, if you've got one. You know when you're just like going, there we go, finally found a 0.1. Every other pen you pick up is not the size you want. So we're going to think about the shape a little bit that we've got here. So in this area, these are going to form sort of like ridges, and we're going to use as a kind of guide to help again with the colouring. So I want a line that's going to come swirling down from here and disappearing into the tail. So it's going to start relatively wide and then come swirling into that tail area. So we've got a thin sort of line coming through, and just same here, just maybe I can get 3 lines into there. And they're going to go into that sort of shadow that we've started to build up in that corner. And then again in this section here, I can probably just get 1 line kind of whizzing all the way down like that. And then again in this one. So our lines aren't just doing pattern and stripe in this, just by giving them, we want to echo the shape that we're drawing them in. So they're kind of coming round, following that shape and then disappearing down into the tail. And that starts to help give form. It starts to make this shape look like it's sort of curving a bit that way as well. And then on this sort of area here in this kind of heart, this sort of like star section, we're going to call that here, I'm going to put some hoops. So again, you might just want to watch while I do this to get the feel of it. So if I start in the middle, again, if we were looking at it sort of front on, we'd almost just see almost like a straight line going down through there. And then as I come round, I'm going to give them a curve, and they're going to go a curve towards the right hand side because I'm going right. So they become more humpy and more like a little hoop or little rainbow, I suppose, coming up into that section and coming round. So they're coming all the way round, going towards the right that way. And then I can come back here and I can go all the way around to the left. But this time my hoops or my my curved lines are going to have a slight bias. Imagine it's like a magnet pulling your pen towards the opposing poles. So as we're going this way, you're just being slightly pulled more towards that. So your line is curving towards that one. And you see that just starts to make this look like it's a bulge or a kind of ridge rather than just being a flat kind of shape. So the pen lines that we're doing are sort of adding a bit of shape as well. And we can do that as well on this sort of, it's something like a wasp section, this, isn't it? So again, just a few. So we're not going to worry about the highlight at this moment. We're just going to put some lines coming across again, sort of just a couple following the curve that we've got with this black line. So they're starting to give this central, the pale section, again, that kind of feel as if it's sort of moving out towards us. So let's just bring these lines over the top like that. There we go. And just this section as well. And again, just think that there's kind of like a magnet pulling your line all going down in the same sort of way. And that starts to again give that kind of a feel. So I'm using a thin pen because I don't want to put too much black into these sections. I want to be sort of I want to control where the black goes so that we can decide. We're going to put more shadow in later, but we're going to keep these quite light. They're sort of like guidelines really for us to use colour in. Now, in this section here, we've got these zigzags. We're going to use zigzag lines in the same kind of way, but when we come to the colour, we're going to give them a slightly different treatment than just a standard like filling in a stripy scarf kind of feel. So we're going to follow the zigzags. Again, because we've got to imagine that we can run our finger along there and feel high points and low points. And then it's still going to disappear up into that corner. So just get a couple of lines in. But think about where those crest bumps come. And they're just sort of, because they're going to kind of follow the ridge. Imagine you're sort of doing like, sort of like a hillside, you know, almost. So as they come down here on this one, see I'm going to come across up and then down and then disappear off round the corner. And then up and down and disappear around. And these lines are going to be a really useful guide to help us with the colouring, and also gives this bit of structure to this shape. We've got this top panel here, however you've drawn this one. So with this one, it's sort of just a very little up and then down, up and then down and disappearing round. And sort of again coming round. And this is all ways that we can use just a very simple line, but it starts to make that, we're going to give it some form and make it look like we could run our fingers through it and it'd feel bumpy. That's what we're sort of aiming for. With these ones, I'm going to leave these ones, we're going to do more on colour with those. So again, they've got a slightly different feel to them. So they're more going to be done with some shading. We've got one more of these sort of circle areas in here, so I'm going to do a similar sort of thing as I did before. I think I find it easy, and if you might find it too, so you start in the middle with a fairly straight one like that, sort of in the, as if it's the sort of one that's front towards you, and then keep working those lines. So as they come round, they get a bit curvier and a curvier. And it always makes me think of, I know it's going to be a ridiculous thing to say, but do you remember Iceland used to sell a prawn ring at Christmas? We'd get the Iceland prawn ring, don't you, for a party, all those prawns with their heads down in a kind of ring. Well, that's kind of thinking all those curved prawn backs going round in a circle. That's kind of what I think of when I'm drawing this, sort of like segments, like looking down on an orange, or I think we'll have to call this the Iceland prawn ring now, won't we? It's taken some of the magic off it, isn't it? But there we go. That's just sort of, so we've got some line work in there. Oh, we've got this spiral as well. So I don't know, we'll think about the spiral, we'll come back to do that. Right, so I'm using these lines both to give us some structure on this sort of surface, but also as a way of helping guide our colouring. So we're going to start with some shading on this section here. So it doesn't matter whatever colour you're in the mood to use, really. I'm going to use a red, you can use a green or a blue, absolutely up to you. But I also, whatever colour you're choosing, go for a middle tone, because we need to go a little bit darker than this colour as well. So you choose a red for your kind of the main thing. The white of the paper is going to be our highlight. So then you want to choose something that's going to be the shadow on this section. Sorry, I keep knocking the camera there. So ideally, when you're using colour, you want to choose something that's going to be a cooler tone. So where you've got the red, an ideal one to go for to be your shadow would be a purple. If you haven't got a purple to hand, you can grab a blue and you can kind of overlay the colours, because the blue is cooler than the red, but it's up to you. That's usually the easiest way of getting the colour. So it's not quite the opposite colour, because that would be green. If you put green with red, it tends to look a bit muddy, but it's, you know, because it's basically on its way to brown. So to begin with, although this is going to be my red section, I'm going to start with the purple pen. So I'm going to purple pencil. So I'm just going to put a little bit, a shade of purple, of following that thin pen line that we've drawn. And as it comes towards the edge, sort of towards the edge of that black wall, it's going to go slightly fatter, that's all. And it's not really going to come all the way into the middle. So again, I'm leaving some white space, or some space on that line. So again, just a little bit of purple kind of coming down from the middle, leaving the central area of this sort of shape here kind of almost untouched, because again, that's where I'm going to get some highlight in. So I'm just literally just putting a little bit of a fuzz, and as I come down, slightly spreading it out into more of a triangle. And down this edge here, look, we'd like to do with the black pen really, so as it comes to the edge of the shapes, we just put a little bit more of the purple sort of line in, and then, oh, don't colour, that's the white one. And then I've got the next section there, just sort of coming along the edges, and it's going to be, you know, you don't have to do it in one hit. You know, you can go back and you can adjust and you can add in, but for the moment, try and keep the colour away from the centre of these shapes, sort of for the sort of high pointers, because that's the bit we want to keep shiny. So again, in this section here, it may only be a little tiny bit of white, but it just really helps to get that kind of highlight feel. So I'm just going down those lines again. Think of the lines almost like they're creases or like ridges, you know, like a sort of ploughed field kind of feel. So they're the sort of the depth of the ridge. There we go. So that's kind of like I've laid some shadow down. I might be able to get my camera to come in a bit closer, because it's not so obvious at the moment, but I think that's a bit closer, isn't it? A little bit. So hopefully you can see kind of what the shadow's doing. So this is like, you know, beforehand, it's sort of like an undercoat, I suppose. And then you're going to go with your red pencil, and where you work over the top of the purple, it should make the red look a little bit darker. And then we can just gently blend that red in. And I still want to leave, at the moment, leave the white sort of areas in the middle of the shape. So I'm going to kind of come around the edges, and it will then hopefully give the feeling of highlight, because as I said, our highlight in this is going to be our paper. That's going to be our brightest thing that we have. So we're following that black line that we've drawn, but in between the black line we're not colouring. So you're kind of clinging your pencil, your shading to the black pen line, but we're ignoring the middle. Again, as if the black pen, magnets are a good metaphor for this. Imagine now that your black pen line is a magnet, and so your pencil is sort of clinging to that line, and you can see it's kind of leaving that white section in the middle alone. Now, this is just like the first layer. Obviously, you can go back and we can add more depth, and we might well do that, but I just want to get all of this section in. Now, if you've got very tight lines very close together, then obviously you're going to hardly be able to leave any white at all. But that's okay, just make sure that you leave the tiniest hint of it, sort of, again, in this sort of middle section where the highlight is coming. And then we can come down here as well in the same kind of way. And again, if it's very tight together, that's fine to kind of blend all the colours together, because as the lines move together, we've seen it before with pen sort of drawing, the closer you pack your lines together, the more pen or the more pencil you've got on the paper, the stronger the colour is. But that has the effect of giving it looking like shadow, and that's what we want in here. So you can see, hopefully, just by putting that little bit of colour and shading in, it's starting to really make this shape look like it's sort of swerving away, almost like a shell or something kind of inside that shape there. So it really helps to kind of give that feeling of three-dimensionality by leaving that white sort of highlight through here. Let's look at what is now going to be called the prawn ring up here. Oh dear, that's taken the edge off, hasn't it? Let's find a contrast in colour and sort of do that. It's a much smaller shape, so we're not going to be able to leave very much white, but we still need to think about using a little bit of white on it. So with this one I'm going to use a blue pencil, and I'm just going to start off by colouring on top of each black line, and you can see how that starts to leave a little bit of white, a sort of white stripe, and eventually I want to kind of go and soften that, so I'm not seeing so much of a stripe but more of a blob of white left behind in the middle of each shape. So if I just start off by colouring on top of my black line, so it's like, instead of like, you know, if you do regular colouring sheets, you know, you try and colour into the white spaces, don't you, and not touch the black lines. With this one we're sort of doing it the other way around. We're colouring on the black lines and leaving the white spaces at the moment sort of untouched, but it's a more sort of subtle approach, helps you to get this kind of feeling across. So we've just left those sort of little bits of white showing, and then what I'm going to do is kind of come in around the edge of each of those shapes and put a little bit of shading top and bottom, but again I'm trying to leave a sort of bubble in the middle of each of those little segments. And obviously as they get smaller it's going to be really hard, if not impossible, to leave a completely white bubble, and that's okay, because as the shapes get smaller you'd see less, you know, they just won't be able to pick up as much light as they do when they're bigger. You know, they haven't got as big a reflective surface. If you imagine this as being made of, you know, plastic or steel or ceramic even, or something with a bit of reflectiveness to it. So you do a little bit of colour top and bottom, and as they go around eventually you can't do top and bottom and leave any white, but hopefully at these bigger end here we're leaving a little bit of white just to kind of give that again form. And it looks quite subtle to begin with, but when you're doing it then you step back and it is quite an effective way of giving that sort of a more sort of 3D feel to it. And the lines that we've drawn in are really useful to help as a guide for getting this to work, but obviously we haven't drawn those lines in these areas, so we're going to get a similar effect just by using pencil shading on those. But this is sort of like to start getting us to think about that just by following the lines that we've got. I've used a blue pencil there. Again, if I wanted to make this overall a sort of darker effect, or maybe not so strong, I could, you know, there's loads of colours I could add into. But what I could also do is, I'm just looking for a paler blue tone in my vast tray of pencils. And again, they're all hiding from me. Here's one. So I'm just going to use a paler blue tone, and I can just go on top of my blue pencil, but maybe add a little hint of this paler blue into some of those white circles that I've left. So that gives me a highlight, but it's a bit more subtle, you know, because the paler blue is lighter, but it's not as bright as the white. So it just maybe adds a bit of subtle dimension to that, means that it's not quite as vivid or as reflective as it was before, just so we can get a different kind of feeling. You can almost work on top of the dark blue, because over the dark blue your pale blue pen kind of doesn't really do a lot. It just adds a little bit of depth, and then as it sneaks onto the white it just slightly makes that less bright, but it still acts a little bit like a highlight because it's a pale colour. It just makes that, then becomes, you get more colour on, then it becomes a more kind of bluey kind of feel. So that's sort of, again, so that's sort of how we might do it around there. And these white lines here are now becoming really nice and sort of bold. Then we've got these areas here where we haven't done lots of lines to follow, so we're going to try and see if we can get a similar kind of effect just using quite sort of soft shading, and eventually we can blend into these sort of black areas, and these will start to look even more like shadow. So for this area I would choose two colours, again a sort of mid-tone, maybe like a mid-tone green and a mid-tone yellow, or something, at least two colours, so you've got your mid and your highlight tone, whichever two colours. You could do it in 2 shades of blue, do it 2 shades of pink, it's up to you completely. And what I'm going to do first of all is use the yellow rather than using the mid-tone. So with the yellow I can get, it's going to be quite tricky to see, of course, I realise on the camera, but hopefully you'll still start to see it. I can do a lot of colouring the yellow first, and I'm not going to leave too much white. I'm just going to leave it almost like a triangle of white, following the shape that I've got here. And then, like, when I get into here, this is probably all going to come yellow. I don't know if I turn the light. You can just about see that I'm colouring it in yellow. Yellow is one of the hardest colours to get across on a video tutorial, so apologies for that, but it does work quite well. So what I've left is here I've got a white triangle left over, and then I've got most of it, the rest of the inside of this shape is coloured in yellow, and what I'm then going to do is work over the top of that yellow in my green pencil, and things will hopefully become a bit more distinct when I do that. So there's my sort of, just about see a hint of yellow, but then if I come back with my green and then I'm start working on top of the yellow, I'm able to blend those sort of two colours together, and I can leave a little bit of yellow around the white circle, which gives me a softer gradation from one into the other. And I think I'm going to get a darker green, and then straight away I can see I want to get a darker green in there, but that's sort of given that now maybe put a bit more tone into it. And now I'm going to get my dark green. If you haven't got a darker green or a particularly dark green to hand, you can like go in with the blue and use that as a shadow. But then if I get, is this a dark green? Yes, it's a stronger green again. So again, but I'm keeping it to begin with round that black outline, so I'm not going too far into that shape. I'm just starting with that little bit of darkness coming round the black line, you see, and that's hopefully starting to be quite a nice subtle blend. You can always go further, you can always go more into the space if you want to, that's not a problem, but start off just sort of going around that outline, a bit like the way we outlined with the black, but now we're kind of outlining with the colour. And then you can then go, right, I can push that a bit further into the shape. I want to get some more colour on there, and eventually thinking about leaving that white space still in the middle, so it's forming a kind of highlight area. I mean, it's going to vary on the paper surface you're working on and the quality of the kind of pencils you're using. Some of them might be stronger than others. Some colours in some sets will always seem to come out a bit differently than others. But if you build it up gradually like this, and then you can say, right, I've got my white highlight in the middle, I can just leave that in there and I can bring the green over, but I've got the subtlety of the other colours blending in. I can go back into the paler green and use that in, just leaving a little tiny like pinprick of white in the middle and keeping the rest of it sort of green, so that but hopefully you're starting to see that that's got a nice quality to it. It's starting to feel like there's some depth. I want to get more shadow into that edge. If I want to remember what I always say, if we want to make the centre look brighter, we need to make the edges look darker. So I'm going to come in, I'm using a blue as a shade, but I'm working over the green so that it comes out, it'll look more like a dark green when I apply it rather than such a blue. But I can blend it into the black line that I've drawn, and hopefully we're starting to get some quite sort of juicy kind of shadows. Can you see how we're coming into these points where the black lines that we've drawn are coming together, and we've got less room to work in? So the more of this sort of blue colour we're adding, the darker and shadier it starts to look, and we're starting to get some really nice contrast. So like just in here again, just coming round the edge of our black outline, just follow the outline to begin with, and that starts to increase the contrast of those shadows, and it starts to give this a bit more depth, because it's the shadows that help us model the shape and make it stand out and look more dramatic. So now I've put quite a dark shadow in that, and you should sort of start to see that we get, we're leaving this highlight, it starts to look a lot more sort of cushiony, like you could sort of reach out and stroke it, and I can blend in my various different shades of green if I want to bring this shadow, and now I feel bold enough to go round with the sort of what was our dark green has now become our mid green. I can sort of evolve that colour across, and just leaving a little bit of highlight in the middle. There we go, and you can see that that's quite, you've ended up being quite bold into those sort of shadows, but it's really starting to make that, where it disappears off into darkness, it really starts to make it look really nice and soft and shadowy. And I think that's working quite nicely on that section there. And then we've got this sort of piece up. We've got this sort of waspy section, aren't we? Which I keep thinking looks like a sort of stripy wasp kind of going along there. So with this one, remember how we've left these sort of bubbles of white on this black section here. So we want to reflect that in our colouring. So similar to what we did before, to begin with, we're just going to put a stripe of colour so that we are getting some colour across the whole thing. So following the thin lines that we drew, just following those across, just to add a little note of colour on those. In the same sort of way, we're going to come back and we're going to add some more. But we're just thinking about remembering where that sort of white highlight on here is. That's it. So just bring that round. And coming over like that. And then when we come back to then do some more colour on here, just at the bottom edge to begin with, because there should be that sort of highlight in the same kind of way as is on the black. So it's in that middle section. So just a little bit of colour on the bottom, on the top, of course, or side to side, whichever you want to think of it as. Just colour those across, and because you've got those lines to follow and the guidelines, it just helps you to kind of, you can kind of find that your pencil strokes are probably going in the same sort of direction as the pen line, and that helps to increase that feeling of surface and contour. And we're just going to leave that white patch. We can come back, as we've seen previously, and work more on it, add more contrast, and just leave it maybe as a pale blue rather than the dark blue. But to begin with, we just lay down this sort of foundation colour, and we should hopefully see this as getting a more and more dynamic sort of surface. It's getting a feeling like metallic or plastic kind of surface. It's got some gleam to it, and a bit like we were doing with the rainbow colours, if you remember how we sort of were blending those together on the previous piece, this sort of is going to help, because we can think about some extra colours on top of this one as well to give it added appeal. So I'm just coming down. Of course, as we go down in the same sort of way, you know, you're going to leave a little tiny bit of white, but you won't be able to leave as much. But as long as you try and leave a little tiny whisper of it in the middle, it's sort of got that nice feel of it curving down, and it becomes quite 3D in effect. And then again, like I was saying, we can come in and use some other colours to blend in to that surface. I'm just going to put some green in just because it was here and I want to see what it looks like. If I work the green over the top, and again it's like the way we overlaid the red, so this is now becoming greener, but you might want to go for like putting a pink over the top, seeing what that does. But I'm just letting a little bit of that colour come over the blue and onto the white section. Not too much, but just leaving the white section, but so I've got a little hint of green reflected onto that white, and it just gives it a nice kind of oily technique. It just kind of gives it a bit more depth and a bit more drama. And if you use colours that are in the same sort of family, so, you know, cool with cool or hot with hot, I think that's probably going to work better. But, you know, experiment, do it the other way around. We'll try that on something else, see how that works. So let's just bring this little bit of green and just that little flash of extra sort of pale colour against that white highlight. Again, it really helps to give this a different kind of feel, you know, very sort of slick kind of quality. And you can sort of bring it along, follow the drawing line that you've got, come it over the top. Again, so I was thinking it's going over the crest of the hill when you sort of do that bit. So it's got a kind of feel. And again, just leaving that white gives it that lovely metallic kind of surface. It makes it look like there's a different sort of surface going on. So I'm just going to have a momentary pause for my obligatory tea slurp. I'm just going to mute so I don't share the slurp with you. Right, okay, so Now we've seen how on these, on most of it so far, we've been able to use these sort of highlights to create a different sort of surface. So we've now got to think about these sort of zigzag areas here, and we can have, these can throw up some challenges. We can do something quite exciting with these. So again, you might want to just watch what I'm doing with this and then have a go at it, or sort of go along with me. But you can see the way we've been using these lines to help kind of guide where we want to colour. So if you imagine that our light source is coming to hit this pattern or this surface, usually light sources are coming from above and they're pointing down because the sun is above us. So that tends to makes more sense to our brain if we kind of work with that. So what I want to imagine, so if that's happening, everything on the kind of right-hand side of our slopes is going to be quite white, quite highlit, and the left-hand side is going to be a lot darker. So that might sound really confusing, but I'm just going to show you on this sort of bit here what I mean, and then hopefully it'll be less confusing. So I'm thinking, so where I want to put the colour is on the left-hand side. So I'm starting with quite a light colour because I can always make it darker. So on the left-hand side there, so that's like as if it was up to that sort of crest of the hill. So just on that side in here, and then leaving this bit white, and then into this next section, and up to the crest of that sort of bend. So I'm imagining that instead of just being a zigzag pattern, that these are like mountainous bends in a sort of landscape. So we're creating a pattern, but we're treating it as if it's a 3D object. So you see how I've just shaded here and here to begin with, and that starts to make that look like this is sort of sticking up and the light's hitting this way. So no shading here, but shading on this bit as it comes up, because that's kind of where the light is hitting. Now you can completely this is a fantastical doodle, so you can mess around with the lighting, you can change it from section to section, you can do all sorts of stuff with it. It's not, you haven't got to, you're not trying to do natural landscape, so you haven't got to abide by all the rules of lighting. So you can see on that section we've got that sort of feel. So on this one up here, I'm going to just have a tiny little bit of left-hand side sort of mountain there, and then another bit on this side, and I'm just colouring across in between the two thick lines, ignoring the thin lines. We'll use them in a bit, but I'm just going to colour across so that I can see what I'm doing. I can sort of plot ahead then, and then take this one up into here. So hopefully that's starting to again get this sort of 3D kind of feel. And then on this one, I can see I can take this section here. This is going to be in shadow, and that's sort of like the crest of a ridge of mountains kind of coming through here, contours, and then this section is going to come in here. So that's hopefully given me somewhere to start with my up and down kind of zigzagging. And then I can take my colour through the lines again, so that I'm going to go through both sides, just because it helps to get a bit of tone across the white, so it's not too stark. And if I just follow those lines again and follow around the edges, it's reflecting the shape that I've got, so it's working with that shape, and it just adds a bit more depth onto those lines. So I can just follow my line with my pencil, so working on top of the pen, kind of coming through. And I mean, you could completely have changed it the other way and had the light source coming from a different side. At each section you can decide where you want your light to come. You haven't got to be universal across it. You can just play with it and create, because this is all sort of like creating these mad clashing kind of effects. Look at this bit here, I think I might want a little bit more shadow there, and then coming across, because my shape was slightly bendier, and that's cool. Bendier is good. That's it. And then we just follow these lines round, and I can come along the edge of my black line again, because that's kind of casting a bit of shadow too. So I'm not going to use green in this one because I want to look at it slightly different from this side. So I think I'm going to try using, what did I say? I said, didn't I, to keep the same colour family, and then I said, oh, we don't have to do that. So let's see what that looks like. Let's go with I'm going to try red on this, and then I just want to add some extra shadow kind of into those shadow areas. So I'm just add a little bit of red tone in, just to see what that does. But I want to sort of blend this in quite nicely, and then I'm going to bring some of the red into the white areas as well. Not my white walls, they're going to stay nice and white for now, but I'm just going to play with those and bring those in. I quite like the red on that. It's sort of linking it to some of the other parts of it. It's also gone a little bit muddy, so I'm not sure. I might put some more blue over the top and just see what that does. But you know, it's all about experimenting. This is a good thing about it, because nobody knows what was in your head, because we're all just experimenting. And you can always pretend you meant it to look like this and then try something different on the next section. You know, it's a doodle. That's the wonderful thing about doodles. They're very liberating, because nobody knows what they're supposed to be. So they can be anything you want them to be. So I'm going to bring... And it's working quite nicely. What I might do is, because I quite like that sort of shadow, but because blue is more of a shadowy colour than the red, blending them together has sort of made it look like it's got a red with a shadow on it. So I think I'm going to bring a little bit of unblended, or sort of like neat red, I suppose, or just the red maybe, onto the white sections, following the line again, and just leave some white paper in that red section. And then that's going to look like we've actually now got a red section. And what we've done, again, really, isn't it, is lay the blue down as a shadow. And then we've put the red on top, and that's working quite nicely now to bring that extra bit of heat and warmth into that white section. But it stops it being completely white, and it just helps to kind of give that illusion again that it's all folding up and down. So that's quite interesting. I might even add a bit of orange into that section in a minute. We'll see. Let's see what that does. And I can just, again, I'm sort of keeping the colour clinging to the lines, the black lines, so I can leave a white space, again, to be the highlight inside every one of those sections. So it just sort of brings the colour in, but it's not the same as colouring in directly. It's not the same as just filling in the square with flat colour, or the shape with flat colour. And then I can go back and going to add a bit more red into the areas where it's shadows and really work that a bit darker. And where I've got, what I like to do is where it's coming into the black line, the thick black line that you've drawn, then let's get in with some more blue and darken it down again, so that it's really blending into that, or starting to move in tonal dark down to that black border, and it just starts to make, or it gives it a bit more drama. It looks nice and sort of smoky and dark. And then I mean, we could even use a black pencil or some black pen to kind of soften those shadows again, which we will have a go at. So I'm just going to bring the tone of that shadow where it's lying next to a black line. I'm going to make it darker again, like into this point as well, so they're going to get really nice. And I'm using more blue, and they're getting really sort of strong and shadowy into that point as they go. So we want to sort of make it quite, we want to have some drama going on here. We don't want it to be too polite and pastel. We're going for something quite striking with this one. So this is quite grrr. So we can blend in, and you can see, you can keep going back and punching up your shadows, saying, right, because looking at this now, if I step back, this shadow is quite nice head. These ones look a bit weak in comparison. So can come back in here, and I can go over. But it's another reason why you should start pale and work it deeper, because then you can control it much better. If you go in really, really dark with your colouring, then you haven't got anywhere to, you can't come back from that. So you can see that by doing it this way round, you can sort of keep stepping back and saying, where do I need? And now I think this one needs a bit more punch, so I'm going to come in again with my blue again and kind of darken those down. And what I'd love to find right now, and I bet it isn't going to be to hand, would be a black pencil, just so I can really blend some of those shadows into the black line. Is this a black pencil? Oh, I can't tell, because it's one of those things, it's like, you know, is it navy blue, is it black? I think it's Prussian blue, but let's come in, and again, more on top of that, into those black, those heavy black outlines, so that it really starts to blend into them, and it starts to get this really soft, shadowy quality, or what I hope is quite a soft, lovely, shadowy quality, and in contrast to the white areas, and that gives it a lot more punch and a lot more drama, which is, excuse me, what we're after here. As I can't find a black pencil, what we can try is to now go for a pen, back to our 0.1 pen or something. If you've got something fine like a 0.05, one of the really, really super fine ones, here I have. So then where you've got this and you want to get some very dark in, you can just overlay a few little bits of black cross hatching into those sort of areas and really build that shadow into those strong outlines where you want to get super extra shade into. Just a few little cross hatches just into that to kind of soften down into that shadow and add a bit of drama. And if you think it's too liney or it's too marky and you don't like it, you can see too much of it, you can always go back again over the top with pencil. But just as you go down into the tips, almost so they're all going down into sooty darkness, and that's going to be nice and dramatic against that. Right, so we're going to then just look at these sections through here. So I want to make some little, again, sort of like soft glow. I think these are sort of like glowstones. I don't know why, but they sort of look more like sort of glowing gems, I suppose, than sort of metal to me. I think I'm going to go for green again. I think I'm just going to go in with my light tone green. And again, I'm just colouring, like leaving a white circle in the middle. So I've just drawn a circle, and then I'm going to take my colour into those corners. So I can leave that highlight, and eventually again I can go back and make it more dramatic. So I do the same thing here. You might want to just make your highlight more like a slightly rounded triangle rather than when you're inside a triangle, that is, because the highlight slightly follows the shape of the object you're doing. So I'm going to do all these three pieces together. When you're doing a larger pattern, if you want to take it across the whole page, if you decide you're going to do like some of these in this same colour and the same treatment, then I would do them each stage in each section so that you can get them to definitely be the same and have the same kind of quality. It's a bit like, as I always say, when you're drawing eyes, you do each stage on each eye, otherwise you forget a stage and you can't get them to look similar. So I've just gone into each one of these with my pale green, leaving a spot of white, and then I'm going to go on top of that now with my emerald green and to begin with kind of like really creep close to that dark black line. So you're going to leave some of that emerald green, but we're going to put a little bit of dark green round the edge, just sort of following those lines and leaving that white centre nice and bright, and again coming in round here. Now, as I said, obviously what I've done is like the central part of this, and you know, if I had not 5 million other things to do relentlessly in my day, I would now sort of like expand this pattern across the whole page and have hours of fun getting this effect to work across it and getting different areas of surface and pattern, and you know, try and get some really three-dimensional, you know, try doing a zigzag but doing this sort of effect on it. All sorts of things you can do to play with this, trying to make some areas really deep and dark. So that's just got those sort of three green glowing sections just sort of in there. And you can, if you want to, where you've got the white sort of walls, as it were, as I call them, in here, you can use a little bit of shading on those as well as they're coming in, a bit like where they're sort of overlapping. So if I just use some blue on here, I can decide to just give that again as I come down to the black line. That just starts to give those kind of, you can see that sort of like same sort of shaded feel. I can decide to do that on some of them where they come in. Some of them I can keep bright, but you know, I can play with that as well. I've got this little area here, another prawn ring. I'll stop calling them that. It just you know, it ruins the magic. Honestly, I don't know what I'm thinking. But I'm going to do that prawn ring in here. Let's do that in maybe shades of orange. Let's have a go at an orangey one. So I need to find an orange pencil. Orange is one of those colours that if you've got a gloomy light on it, suddenly you pick up a pink thinking it's orange because it sort of like mutates. But I think this is sort of an orange. Yeah, okay. So again, same sort of thing. Just follow those contour lines that we drew in black first. You know, just to kind of get that colour first of all, leaving a white stripe to form our kind of highlight. and then come in and just sort of maybe along the bottom of each of those sections adding a bit of orange, just to sort of soften those shapes up, and just leaving a little bit of bubble of white. And then because we're on orange, we could use a red as our slightly more shadowed colour, because the red is the stronger version. So I can just do a little bit in at the bottom of each of those, just to kind of, you know, add some depth, and bring those sort of round. There we go. And that's just sort of almost like a little pumpkin, actually, I think. Look at this. It's a really good effect for doing your Halloween pumpkin drawings. And then what am I going to do with the stars? What are we going to do with the stars? Well, I think we should at least make them nice and sort of punchy and bright. So I'm definitely, as I've got the orange in hand, she said picking up the red, as I've got the orange in hand, I'm just going to give this a really nice bright orange, sort of flat colour like that. And then that one, because it's an orange background, let's give it some green, because that will make it really stand out and look even more like a pumpkin. Then I've got a spiral. I've got this spiral down here, haven't we, that we sort of haven't really thought about at all particularly. But I think we want something to contrast into the green. So let's go with the orange, as we've got it sort of happening in here. So again, so, you know, again, so I'm going around with my orange, leaving my white highlight in the middle. I can then leave that leave that as a gleam in the middle, and then I can go back with some red, and I'm going to put the red round the edge because it's my shadow, you know, so that's going to give that, you know, give that shadowed effect, give it a bit more of a domed feel. Now I'm feeling that looking at this sort of section here, I want to get a bit more emphasis into this. So now that I think I'm seeing how sort of strong we're getting, I'm going to use some orange on this. I want to decrease the white a little bit, but just follow that shape again, but overlaying with orange, still keeping some white on, but, you know, just blending that in a bit more, leaving my white, still following those lines, because it kind of gives them that, again, that sort of segmented feel. Just following across along the lines that I've got drawn, but just still leaving a little white, eating a little bit of my white away, but making sure I leave a tiny bit so it's still got that sort of gleam. Just sort of like, when you get to this stage, what you're doing is kind of looking where you want to add extra drama, where you want to darken the shadows a bit more. So let's think about some of these edges again where I've got this dark. I really need to find a black pencil. It's so annoying that it's hiding from me. But of course, in a set of pencils, you get 5,000 colours, don't you, and one black pencil. So it is rather outnumbered. I'm having a quick rummage down below. I didn't think I wanted a black pencil, you see, when I started, and now I do. So, oh, that's annoying. I have found a black pencil, but it's a charcoal pencil, which means if I use it, it's going to create a weird surface. And it'll probably feel horrible. It won't blend with my other pencils. It doesn't like them. They're very sort of very snobby charcoal pencils. You don't like mix. You don't mix well at parties. I give up. I'm not going to be able to find it. But I just wanted to get a bit more. So what I'm going to do then, instead of the pencil, is use one of my 0.5 pens, and on some of these sort of white lines here, I'm just going to add a little bit of shading in, just some cross hatching, just to change them a bit now, to give them a bit of, so where we've got to give them a bit more form. So where we've got the shadow here, I can bring my shading in. I see I'm mimicking the shadow that I've got in the colours, just to kind of give that again a bit more form. So on this side here, it's in the shadow, so I'm going to come across here. I'm just using little tiny cross hatchings really close together in a very, very fine pen, just to darken that down. So in here, I'm going to say that's now in shadow. So yep, I can darken that down. It just starts to add to that 3D feel. So on here as well, where these are going in. And that's a good thing about this, you know, we've gone to all these lengths to define these white areas, but at the last, you know, as we come towards finishing this off, we can decide to use them, and they can be used to add extra sort of drama and shadow into these sort of pieces as they're running. As they come up into this corner, again, if you want to get them darker, just make your lines go smaller and smaller and tighter, and they're almost blending away into the darkness, into the shadow. So the whole of this tip here becomes really quite dark, and again, it adds to the impact that it makes. And I can bring, that sort of dark into there. So that sort of really helped to kind of add some drama to this. Again, on these edges here, I can overlap the colouring that I've put on here. If I want to add some more lines here, just a few little lines of pen coming across, just to sort of increase the drama and start to give this even more form. And it's just sort of going back and playing with this and editing it, and seeing where you want to add more, always bearing in mind that you can always go darker, but you can't particularly go lighter again. So it's a balance between getting all the colours down first of all, and then going back in and saying, right, which ones do I want to make darker, and just keep stepping back and assessing where you are so that you don't go too far. Although, it's quite hard to go too far, and sometimes you go too far, and then I would say, if you think you've gone too far, go a bit further, and then it will really start to look, like you meant it. That's always the number one thing that you learn at art school, is how to make all the mistakes you make look like you meant it. And, so again, I'm going to think about this sort of area, this red area in here. I can add a little bit of blue into the bottom of these, just sort of, again, blending into that dark outline and just following the lines I've got, really, but just helping to, and that blue is going to be, again, a bit of a darker shadow against some of these brighter colours, and that's just going to help to give this, again, just more, keep saying more drama, more form. That's what you want for this, really. It's really sort of using this to create really sort of dramatic, vibrant surfaces. So we are using pattern, but we're using it in a way that really helps us describe shape, and it's not just about, like a patchwork quilt kind of pattern. It's got a bit more going to it. These ones here, I think, again, as I've got my blue in hand, I'm just going to darken the corners of each shape as they fit in, again, to give them more form. And you can see this one, where I've got this sort of sweep of shadow coming down here, I might kind of imagine that this side of this shape is kind of part of that sweep of shadow. So I can just darken up that one side through there. See, that's sort of starting to kind of carry that shadow through. And on this one, I'm sort of imagining it's kind of falling away, but it's going to still be a bit more shadowed on this side. Maybe this front bit is turning towards the sun. It's really quite playing with this and seeing how you can get the light into it and get the light to reflect the form and help the forms work. It's actually a really interesting way of exploring that you could then bring to doing more sort of representational drawings. Like I'm going sort of quite blue on these now. I'm really getting those quite dramatic. And it's quite fun doing this because you can kind of explore ways to create light and shade in. And then if you ever come to do or try sort of more representational art, you've actually practiced a lot of those same techniques with this sort of, with Doodle. And it's great because you don't have to, you don't feel worried about if it doesn't work out because it's just a doodle. So it's, you can practice all these kind of skills. And then you find if you do come to take it into other forms of art, it's actually all just the same skills. It's just seeing where light falls. So if this was in shadow here, then I might think, right, this side of my pumpkin shape here, this might need a bit more shadow. So I can just do that kind of side just around that corner there. And imagine that my sun's sort of coming this way. So so that's going to add a bit of drama into that. And you see that immediately helps to make that, see how that's now setting kind of in the right sort of feel. On this one here, again, we can put a bit more shadow into it. Just sort of coming into that. And what about these stars? What if they were casting a bit of shadow? So what if we had a bit of shadow just coming around those shapes, but just on the one side? So it's sort of just maybe on that side, and it's just coming across the top there. And that starts to look, that's just making a little bit of shadow around there and just changing the feel of it. And this one here, again, I can use my blue in just to kind of make that pop. And what's happening with this white line here, well, let's bring this round, let's get some shadow into that, just so it disappears around. Those corners are getting really soft, and in here as well, they're going to get a bit darker. You know, you can make rules, you can break rules. That's the great thing about doodling. You don't have to stick to the rules that you've made yourself. You can change. I just wanted to bring some more shadow into those. I think it helps to kind of get those shapes to kind of fold round. So there we go. So we're sort of slowly getting to, well, slowly, if I say slowly, always quite quickly getting to the end of the session. Always feels like it's no time at all since we started, because, you know, it's so lovely when you're concentrating on something like this. Time just goes whizzing by, doesn't it? So again, look, I'm putting a bit of shade on this, but just on this side of this sort of pumpkin edge. And again, that's helping make that look more three-dimensional. And you see, if I'd said you were going to sort of we're going to do all this really complicated three-dimensional shading to make these shapes pop out, it'd be quite daunting to start. But if we've said sort of, we're just doing Doodle, so we've actually managed to slowly work our way to doing some really quite sophisticated tonal work on this. I'm just putting a bit of extra on here because, again, on this sort of dark edge where it's sloping away, I'm imagining that's going to be in shadow. It's such a great, I hope it's, you know, showing you some really interesting sort of techniques, you know, on that. And it now looks like a sort of quite like a 3D object. I don't know what on earth it is, some sort of strange thing, but I could almost reach out and pick it up off the page. And I'm hoping that you're getting a similar kind of effect. And again, of course, I can now keep building. I can build some more units on round the sides and increase my pattern, increase it across the whole page, or I can leave it just as that is. But I hope that's given you an idea how to get some real dramatic kind of shadows and light and shade into a doodle.